Yes, the webinar is now open and is starting to broadcast.
Okay, thank you. You're making me smile just said okay, I'm calling the meeting to order. Before we turn to, good evening, everybody. Before we turn to reports to students, I know the board wants to acknowledge the recent passing of Keith Yeiser. I'm going to turn it to you, Bob.
Yes, thank you, Dean. Thank you, Rena. Yes, on Monday morning, we conveyed the sad news of the passing of Keith Yeiser, former youth services worker at Mamaronic High School, and a fixture in the Mamaroneck community, Mamaroneck athletics, and Westchester County athletics. Mr. Yeiser, a longtime resident of Mamaroneck, was known for his kind, warm, and inviting ways. He began his career in 1985 in Mamaronic High School, and he was a champion for many years for so many young people in our community and had a significant impact in countless lives, as well as the lives of many others, providing advice, offering compassionate conversation and encouragement, or just simply listening and being present. Mr. Yeiser will be missed by many. And on behalf of our district and all of our alumni and friends, our thoughts and prayers go out to the entire Yeiser family, including his 4 relatives who are current employees of our school system, Joseph, Christian, Gabe, and Ebony. I thought it would be important to just convey the voices of staff who work closely and friends with Mr. Yeiser for many years. And Anthony Vinny, a high school science teacher, and the high school football coach, had shared his comments to his football players when he learned of the sad news. And I just want to quote from Mr. Vitti. Mr. Yeiser was the youth liaison officer at MHS for many years, mentoring countless students in his time, making everyone feel special. He championed social justice and dignity for all people and was always on the scene for students in need, no matter how big or small the crisis. The surname Yeisers is synonymous with Mamaroneck as apple pie is to America. Keith's amazing extended family all share the most beautiful smiles, engaging warmth, and firm belief that our youths are golden. To Yeiser, our community and its many schools, ball fields, and playgrounds were sacred. He recognized the good in every single child and could tell you exactly when and in what form they would shine in the future. As I sit here, I cannot imagine how many countless lives he has touched, creating pathways through the darkness for so many. So thank you, Coach Vitti, for those just kind and thoughtful words.
Thank you, Bob. And now on behalf of the board, thought it particularly appropriate that we're lucky to have a board member who actually attended Mamaroneck High School when Keith was an employee there. Christian, I'm going to turn it over to you just to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Rena. I will do my best to honor what Keith Yeiser meant to us growing up around Columbus Park, the village, and our time together at MHS. Things were so different back then, but through the decades, Keith was a constant force for good. This brother made an impact on lives of families at a multi-generational level. His patience and grace was powerful. He could speak to him in a way that felt familiar and indulge in a teachable moment if people would just listen. We need more Keith Yeisers in the world. We need more young men of color to follow in his righteous steps here in our community. His legacy has etched its way into our hearts as evidenced by the outpouring of love received on social media and around the Lower Hudson region, but especially within the Mamaroneck and Rhinebeck School District. As a young brother coming up, he was a light in the darkness, like was just mentioned. He cared about us when so many thought we were lost. His office was our classroom, a safe space where you could make mistakes. But above all else, he believed in us and encouraged us to advocate for ourselves. Keith Yeiser graduated a Panther with the heart of a tiger. God was good to share his light with us. A wise man once said, "You can't change the world, but you can make a corner of it look pretty darn nice." Keith Yeiser was about that life. And our prayers go out to his family during this time of loss. To the Iser family, may God bless you and comfort you in his loving embrace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. And now, fittingly, we're going to turn to our two students for their reports, turning it to Jacinta and Thomas with their wonderful winter wonderland backgrounds. So, and Santa hat. So take it away, guys.
Hi, thank you all for, was very moving about Mr. Geyser. Their family is very nice, and I played junior basketball, JV basketball, my sophomore year, and Mr. Geyser and his family are definitely like cornerstones in this community. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about Okra and how that's going in the high school pace, and some things that kids are doing in collaborative design. So in Okra this year, I talked to one of the students, Nate Reynoso. He's an incredible student. And I think it's interesting that, you know, there's original civics, research, and action. That's what it stands for. And like with the pandemic, you know, it's a real call to action for MHS students to, you know, look at the community and find ways that they can address the problems that, like a hypothetical situation, like a pandemic or climate change, you know, like these are things that you don't think would be as prominent in our society, but suddenly we're faced with them. And it made school go entirely virtual for those like last 4 months last year. So, you know, Okra had to go all digital. And Nate was telling me that a lot of so his project with his group of students is that they studied the socioeconomic inequity that children face when they can't, when their parents can't afford to pay for extracurricular activities for them. So him and his group were trying to find ways that they could fundraise money and send kids at MAS, Central, and Chatsworth to local businesses like School of Rock Music, Mac Inspires, Achievement Learning Center, and Groove. And they actually, last year, they had a lot of, like, they had these businesses set up where they were going to send the students there, and these businesses cut the cost for them for like 8 or 10 students for one business, 8 or 10 students for another business. And they would meet the rest of that cost by fundraising money and going into the community to sponsor these kids. And I think that was really amazing. But with the pandemic, you know, this it complicates the layer even further. And him and his 2 other group members had to really like look and see, you know, not only are these kids facing socioeconomic inequity, but these businesses are too, like they're suffering in the pandemic. So he told me that through Okra and the pandemic, they've had to assert a prominent digital presence. And they actually, something that they might not have thought was so important in January of last year, they actually programmed an app where people can virtually donate money and sponsor these kids that they're actually going to send in January to these local businesses to enjoy these extracurricular activities. So I think that was, it was hearing from him, from a student, he's like researching, and it's not just like a math class where students are like, well, how does this apply in real life? No, like Okra applies in real life, and you feel like you're making a difference, especially in a pandemic where you might feel like, oh, I'm stuck at home, I'm quarantining. How can I make a change in my community? Well, I'll send an email to this psychiatrist at this school and start figuring out if these kids are getting the extracurricular activities and support that they need. So, and even another anecdote that I have is that this one's a little bit more edgier, but a group of kids are hosting backyard movies at people's houses, coronavirus friendly, spread out, and the money that they would receive for having this event for a family or for religious activity, they're telling their customers to pay a local business instead, which is even more vital in the pandemic because businesses are suffering and losing activity within the community. So I don't know, I was inspired to hear about my local peers being very much, indebted to the community and committed to seeing people succeed. The PACE performed the first of their 3 digital senior productions. And even though they've gone digitally, a lot of the students have told me that, they're still taking advantage of their senior year, and in PACE, they're choreographing together, and that it's still fun and they're still engaging with their students, even if it's virtually. And then collaborative design is also another important class this year. That's another guinea pig of the extra, I forget what they're called.
Electives.
Yeah, the electives. And 2 groups that I talked to are making prototypes, designing marketing strategies for projects like a robot that cleans up the harbor and the water pollution in the harbor. And another group is creating a device that's like a portable study area for kids, and programming that and creating prototypes that I've seen are really incredible. Like, MHS students have such drive to make their ideas come into fruition. So even though there's, environmental factors and obstacles that they're facing, being able to communicate through Zoom, students are making the most of it. So it was exciting to interview my peers and find out how these classes are succeeding as much as they are.
Thanks so much, Jacinta. Really incredible stuff going on at the high school with our students. And we're going to hear about more incredible stuff after you and Thomas give after you finish up your report from we'll hear from the Schools Foundation about some of their grants. One relates directly to the Okra project that you were just discussing. Thomas.
Yes. So I'll reintroduce myself for anyone who's not at the last board meeting. And my name is Thomas Seward, and I'm the senior class president. And in student council this year, we've been working on plenty of festive school spirit initiatives. Before Thanksgiving, there was a potato sack race where the 4 grades all competed against each other in a spirited competition. And for around Christmas and holiday spirit and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, we're raising money for charity. And we're doing this through carrying on the annual Jingle Links competition, which is where we sell strips of paper, the Jingle Links, to students throughout the high school for $1 each. These strips of paper are tied into chains, and they're separated by class and hung in the overpass. And there's a sense of competition of which class makes the longest chain. And the money spent on these Jingle Links, it traditionally goes towards buying gifts for an underprivileged child in the city. But this year it's going to local families, as obviously the pandemic has affected a lot of people. And the amazing thing is that this year we have raised, historically, we sell around $300 to $400 worth of Jingle Links, which is amazing. But this year that number is up to over $1,500. And this was probably one of our only events that was significantly better off online and digitally, because using Venmo and other cash substitutes, it was super convenient for kids to donate. Whereas normally you'd have to barter with them to get anything out of their wallet. It's a lot easier to just send someone money on Venmo. So we were able to raise, again, over $1,500, which is just amazing. The Social Events Committee, or SEC, has also been hosting events. For example, this past week, I partook in a Zoom holiday named that tune, which was very fun. And on a completely different note, some of you may be aware that about the bees at the high school. And for everyone who's not, there's bees at the high school, but it's completely under control and run by a club called the Bee Team. They're currently in the midst of their largest honey harvest yet, and they're preparing to remove and bottle the honey from the hives, which is just amazing. The hives are prepared for the winter, so there isn't much to do until spring, but the club has plans of expanding by hopefully trying to mentor other schools in the district and perhaps local parks to have their own hive sites. Academically, things have been going along swimmingly in school. Zoom has been a great tool, and for classes like AP Literature, it has been seamlessly integrated into English class staples like book clubs and group readings. In AP Physics C, the concept of the screen share and recorded classes and lessons have been a godsend. And even in classes like Clay, remote learning is doing well just by simply working on our bowls and vases at home. So that's kind of a snapshot on what things are looking like in the high school. Jacinta, if you have anything else to add.
No, I mean, yeah, all my classes through Zoom are very easy to pay attention to.
I would just like to give a shout out to the MHSB team. I think they were shooting to double their honey production from 100 to 200 pounds in 1 year. So there's the bees are in some ways ignoring the pandemic, and we are happy with the progress of our honey production. So thank you to Kathy O'Reilly and to James Love and all the members of the bee team.
Thanks. They're the A team for the bees. So thank you both. Thomas, Jacinta, have a wonderful, what appears to be a likely snow day on Thursday. Stock up on hot cocoa and mini marshmallows and enjoy, and have a wonderful holiday and break from school.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you again, and we'll see you next year. Okay, we're going to turn now to item 3, Mamaronic Schools Foundation student grants. Recommended action that the board accepts the student grants recommended by the Mamaronic Schools Foundation as just presented and listed on the attachment. Now we're going to go back because those grants have not been presented. I know that we have the Schools Foundation. Are we letting in our Jackie Emmett, who's speaking for the
It's Julie Converser. I don't know if Julie is speaking.
Julie?
I just believe we have the video to show.
Okay, so we'll go to the video where we hear directly from the students.
Yes, and I would say I wanted to begin to, if I can, just acknowledge the incredible partnership and support for the Mamaronic Schools Foundation. Several years ago, we kind of brainstormed on the idea of adding to the grant process with student grants. It's been a resounding success. It's generated incredible interest from our students, as well as creative ideas of innovation. And so this is yet again, an incredible way of community members supporting the educational process of students. So hopefully I'll be able to share and authorize this video so that we can all hear. This is the third time's a charm. So hopefully the audio will come through as we hear from the voices of students who are excited by the opportunity to move forward on a grant award from the Mamaronic Schools Foundation. Can we hear it?
Thank you so much, Mamaronic Schools Foundation. We're really excited to use this grant to streamline our process, placing underserved students in extracurricular opportunities. This will allow our initiative to sustain and allow us to help more students in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the MSF grant. With this opportunity, we hope to further improve our digital platform and allow for a more efficient and effective way of connecting underserved students in the community with extracurricular opportunities.
Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to expand our digital platform and outreach. Hi, my name is Sean Rosenblatt, and I'm here to tell you about my grant called Learn What I Do and How It Can Help You, the Speaker Series. The idea is that either bi-weekly or every month, we have a guest speaker run a remote Zoom lesson explaining what they do for a career and the skills necessary to do well in that field. For example, we might have a finance person come and explain what they do working at a bank and then teach how the stock market works. Why is this important? Because students so often don't learn the basic skills like how to write a proper and effective email or how to develop a relationship with clients. These are things very important when entering adulthood. I would like to thank the Mamaronic Schools Foundation for giving me this opportunity and the amazing student grant program. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna Robarts, recipient of the Community Gallery Grant. I wanted to take the time to sincerely thank the Mamaroneck Schools Foundation for supporting my initiative to create this installation. My goal is to showcase our diverse artistic community. So not only is this installation important to me, but it is also important to the students that it will hopefully inspire to collaborate and embrace projects across art mediums and electives offered at our school. So thank you, MSF, for your support and consideration to hopefully turn the community gallery from an idea to reality.
Hi, my name is Abby Tucker, and my grant is for specialty microphones to bring music performances outdoors. Not only will these microphones help during the pandemic, but they will allow the music department to bring concerts to the community outdoors in the future. I would like to thank the Schools Foundations for supporting this grant and all they do to support our schools.
Hi, my name is Alex Boswell, and I am one of the members of the MHS Okra Group. I'd just like to say thank you guys so much for accepting our grant and being able to fund us, and we're able to work with you guys and be able to continue our work with the project in the future. So we've decided to focus on developing an app.
My name's Amelia, and I'm a senior.
My name is Jacinta Smith, and I'm a senior.
With the help of our advisors, Mr. Shansky and Ms. Martinez, we applied and received 2 grants for our high school's new multicultural student union. After designing and posting large format posters for this year's first Hispanic Heritage Month, we were compelled to ask MSF to fund future Heritage Months for our first grant.
Our second grant includes the funding for our student-run public website with college information and service opportunities for multicultural members and their families. These grants are important because they highlight and celebrate the diverse cultures that exist within our community. Through these grants, our club can cohesively provide support and resources for students to educate themselves and prepare themselves to succeed. We are very excited to thank the Mamaroneck Schools Foundation for funding and supporting us and can't wait to start.
Okay, so I want to take the opportunity to just recognize Ellie Converser for editing that wonderful student video. I believe 7 grants were awarded by the Schools Foundation and totaling $8,058 of grant award. A lot of creative energy from our students. And again, incredible appreciation for the Schools Foundation for supporting this initiative. And we look forward to in hearing back from our students as they move forward on their grant ideas and applications.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks to the Schools Foundation for your unwavering support of our students and our schools. You truly make a difference, as do all of your contributors. So we are very, very appreciative and really look forward, as Bob had said, to seeing the work that these students do. Okay, items to be, we're going to turn now to the consent agenda. Items to be removed from consent agenda. If a board member wishes to, oh, actually, you know something? I don't think we ever took, I'm going to go back to the Schools Foundation grant. We never made a motion to accept them. Recommended action that the Board of Education accepts the student grants recommended by the Mamaroneck Schools Foundation as just presented and listed on the attachment. Can I have a motion?
So moved, Sam.
Second, Ariana.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. If a board member wishes to remove an item on the consent agenda for further discussion, a motion to remove item from the consent agenda must be made. However, once a motion and second are made for the consent agenda items listed below, simple questions can be asked regarding any of them, as you would normally do for individual resolutions. Consent agenda. A, approval of minutes of the 12/1/20 study session and the 12/8/20 work session. B, approval of personnel actions. C, approval of treasurer's report. D, acceptance of bids. E, approval of vendor agreements and amendments. F, approval of health service vendor agreements and amendments. G, approval of budget transfers. H, acceptance of arrangements for appropriate special programs and services as recommended by CSE, CPSE. I, acceptance of gifts and donations. Can I have a motion?
So moved, Sam.
Second?
Second, Ariana.
And I just want to read briefly the gifts and donations. We have a Carlo Rebelli string bass model and soft case and English stand for Mr. Evan Wallach for the music department, an iPad 4th generation 32 gigabyte model from Mr. Bob Meglio for the district technology department to be used for a student or staff member, and $147.17 from the Mamaroneck Larchmont Special Education PTA for the 2020-2021 SEPTA grants. Thank you to Mr. Wallach, to Mr. Meglio, and to SEPTA for your donations. Bob, before we approve these, is there anything you want to add? Okay. All in favor?
So moved, Gladys.
Aye. Okay. Resolutions. A, resolution to execute a consent order and judgment. Be it resolved that the Board of Education authorizes its attorneys Shaw, Perelson, May, and Lambert to execute a consent order and judgment in a tax certiorari proceeding captioned 1060 Bayhead LLC versus Town of Mamaroneck and the Mamaroneck Union Free School District. Be it further resolved that the board authorized the refund of taxes as required by the terms of the consent order and judgment. Can I have a motion?
So moved, Sam.
Second?
Second, Gladys.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
B, resolution regarding the New York Liquid Asset Fund. Now therefore be it resolved that the board approves the following. A, the definition set forth in Article 1 of the agreement shall be amended as follows. Investment consultant means PMA Asset Management LLC or such other person who shall be acceptable to the governing board. Marketing agent means PMA Securities LLC or any other person or persons appointed or employed or contracted by the governing board pursuant to section 4.2 and 10.2 hereof. Services and marketing agreement means any agreement entered into with respect to any of the portfolios by the governing board with the marketing agent pursuant to this agreement in connection with the execution of securities transactions and the delivery of securities. B, any other references in the agreement to RBC Global Asset Management US Inc. or RBC Capital Markets in the agreement shall now be amended to read PMA Asset Management LLC or PMA Securities LLC. Resolved that no other public hearing, necessary referenda, or governmental consents are necessary for the board to approve the amendment set forth above, and there are no additional requirements of the board in connection with such approval. And the board has satisfied all other requirements applicable to its making contracts in connection with its role as participant. Resolved that adoption of this resolution by the board and its certification by the clerk shall serve as evidence of the approval of the amendment by majority of the board, the executed counterpart of the proposed amendment, and the certificate required by section 13.1 sub C of the agreement, and shall constitute participant approval of the amendment requested by the governing board. Can I have a motion on that rather long resolution?
So moved, Sam.
Second, Ariana.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Thanks, Christian. Okay, Bob, we're going to turn to you for the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. I just want to begin my report once again acknowledging the incredible level of professionalism and commitment of teachers and our administrators as we continue to prioritize health and safety and in-person learning. As our community fully understands, as we face the reality of increasing positivity rates, I think daily notices of confirmed COVID cases among students and staff and residents. It is really about navigating the ability to kind of bring about some level of consistency and prioritize and focus on teaching and learning. So my hat's off to our teachers, our faculty, our support staff, our clerical custodians. Everyone is doing their part to really, what I would say, allow students to learn and really have teachers focus on teaching and learning as well. And thank you to our parents who've been patient and supportive and working with us, knowing that every day and any day could change in a moment relative to the news of how we need to be nimble and flexible in thinking about where we're going to teach on a particular day within and across the system. I also just want to mention that as we approach the holiday break, we are cognizant of the fact that our families will engage in the holiday season. Despite the federal government's caution about the dangers of socialization and gatherings, we recognize that we have a responsibility as we come back to maintain a safe learning environment. One of the things I have been looking into, number one, is to prepare for the possibility of our community being named as a microcluster zone and the impact of the requirement for 20% or 30% testing of in-person students and staff to stay open. In addition to that, thinking about similar to how colleges and universities have approached the learning environment, the idea of seeking approval to test all of our students and staff from the Board of Education during the week of January 5th, thinking conceptually about looking into the possibility of transitioning to a full remote environment right after the new year, initiating a school-based testing program so that when students and staff return on the 11th, we have a baseline to understand it. One of the challenges that we face, and again, I want to acknowledge the hard work of Dr. Nora Mazzoni, who has been really managing and overseeing daily COVID response, is that unless we can pause and really identify who is symptomatic to COVID, we are always responding or reacting to news of a positive test and then reacting by quarantining aspects of students and staff. Whereas if we could, through a pause and a natural break in the calendar, achieve a baseline to know who should remain out of school and continue then with some form of pool testing, we may be able to maintain an environment that looks different from what we've experienced over the last several months. And so I put that out there, and I don't want to at least start now, but I think having a conversation with the board about what that would look like. One of the things that I'm waiting for an answer from the New York State Department of Health is that if we were to initiate during the week of January 5th, our school-based testing program, what would that mean if our positivity rates exceed what is identified through the microcluster regulations as too many within one school, and which would automatically force a school closure. So we wouldn't want to create the conditions whereby being proactive and creating safe conditions that we've sidelined the district because we're operating on something that is not yet in place, but regulations that need to be clarified. So I just want to hold that thought as we think about that. I believe the board, I don't know through the consent agenda for an amendment, approved a partnership with Miramis testing labs. They have been operating a COVID testing lab for many months, working in partnerships with districts, colleges, universities, businesses, private schools to conduct pool testing. And so through the board's action and through the generosity of an anonymous donor, we now have the funding to be able to meet the 20% testing requirement if we become a designated district. The idea is to understand the cost and the capability of going beyond that by, again, considering a full testing program when we return in January. So I just want to hold that thought there because we can return to that, but there are a few other announcements. This week, actually, I think yesterday, we held the first meeting of the expanded district equity team. I know Gladys, and I don't mean, I appreciate your participation as a board member, but we're pleased to be joined by a number of parents, community organization representatives, faculty members, students and staff, as we started to kind of, what I would say, convene the expanded version of a district equity team. We sought feedback from our new members, and the hope is that on the 14th, we will convene our advisory committee and roll up our sleeves and start to form our work plan based on the draft work plan for the remainder of the year and into the summer months. And so more to talk about and report on that. But it was a great first meeting with, I think, new members and participation. I also want to just acknowledge members of our district crisis team that have been meeting regularly and trying to understand the concerns and issues around our families and students relative to mental health issues and to the well-being of not only our students, but our families, and the partnerships with many of our organizations in the community providing ongoing support, resources to help at this most serious and significant moment for our community as well. So it is really an incredible group of faculty members, of staff, of representatives from support organizations, and they're doing incredible work. And so I just want to acknowledge their commitment as well. You know, we are at a challenging moment for our school system as we look ahead to finalize a budget. We are waiting for news about the federal government's efforts to support states and local communities and government and school districts to deal with the added costs and expenditures to create safe learning environment. We need to understand the forward fiscal environment and how that might have an impact on our school system and our district as well. And so we're thinking about a lot of things at this moment as we kind of anticipate a pause for the holidays. Finally, I just want to say I wish all of our families a joyous holiday season, a safe and joyous holiday season, and an effort to kind of spend time with family members at a moment where family and that close connection is incredibly supportive and important. So that's really my report for this evening. One last thing, I did announce, for those who are listening, we announced in anticipation of a nor'easter and the likelihood of inclement weather on beginning Wednesday afternoon. We have, at the elementary level, parent-teacher conference scheduled until 5:15. And so I appreciate, again, the flexibility, the last-minute change in plans and the understanding of our elementary parents by shifting our instructional day tomorrow, beginning at 8:10 to 10:10 for the traditional morning pod, and moving the afternoon pod into the morning hours from 10:40 to 12:40, so that teachers can safely travel home and then begin our parent-teacher conference schedule from 2:15 to 5:15. So thank you to our elementary parents for that late-minute notice. Finally, as Jacinta and Thomas alluded to, if Mother Nature comes through with this nor'easter and this significant storm, we would declare on Wednesday evening or very early Thursday morning a traditional snow day. So get out your shovels, I should say. Thank you.
Bob, thank you for that. Now, with respect to the potential expansion of the testing to include pool testing for the entire district, those who are doing hybrid learning, when would you propose to bring that before the board?
Well, I mean, the timing is critical if we are going to kind of move forward with this concept of transitioning to full remote for the week of January 5th. And so I would need some, at least a quorum of the board to support and consider the expected cost, which would be somewhere in the vicinity, I would think, based on the number of individuals. We've already put in place a parental consent for students that we have, I would say about 98% of in-person learning students, parents have approved consent to move forward for testing for using a saliva-based test that can be self-administered, as well as testing 867 staff members. That is somewhere in the range of $70,000. One of the things we've talked to communities to seek community financial support, given the fact that in a tight budget year, we didn't anticipate to extend what I would say is this commitment to health and safety by initiating a 100% or close to it a testing initiative. This, however, would create the conditions where we can at least proactively move forward without this challenge of day-to-day experiences. So I guess, Marina, I think it's important, one, to get confirmation from the State Department of Health that this would not sideline us by going forward outside of the microcluster designation. So I'm waiting to hear, and we'll follow up tomorrow with Dr. Amler from the Westchester County Department of Health, who is advocating for on behalf of our district. I think once I get that update, and then it's to sit back and return to the board to consider this initiative and to see logistically if we could then turnkey and plan for this and communicate and put it in place during the week of January 5th. So,
okay. And we think
so it would require multiple steps, I guess. And obviously the 22nd, I believe, is the last day that we're open. So we have a quick window of turnaround. So getting some consensus from the board, at least in consideration, would be helpful.
Okay. And here's my question. If we're doing it when our school buildings will be on full remote, how would students obtain the testing vials for the spit test? I would imagine that there are a lot of details to be worked out.
Right. So first of all, beginning tomorrow, I'm going to generally just begin to communicate and share information, whether it's the pool testing and diagnostic testing as part of the microcluster, more information about our partnership with Mamaroneck Lab. So really to provide parents with some, and our staff members with background information of the process. This is a saliva-based self-administered test, so it is less invasive than a nasal swab. It is something that our youngest students could do with guidance at home. We are going to organize, and it's important that none of the information, the identifiable information that goes from here at the school to the lab. So this is completely HIPAA compliant relative to the process. And so it's really about at the end of the line, the district becomes aware of which individual or individuals or staff member students that have tested positive. And it's a PCR-based test, so the reliability or the validity of the test is very consistent, and it's different from an antigen test. So all that information needs to be shared. We've already worked behind the scenes with a group to think logistically of how we would kind of operate. That certainly will be different in scope and size if you're talking about 533 test samples versus 5,000 and beyond that in terms of the total population. So we're going to kind of work through this, report out to the board in the next 48 hours, and just kind of understand if it's feasible, possible, and if in fact the board supports it. It is somewhat aligned with the work we have to do for doing this on a smaller scale in anticipation of the possibility of the microcluster designation. And so we have been working for several weeks, and I would say more than a month, in understanding who is the partner that could work with us, that has the capacity. What is the quick turnaround in terms of the testing protocol, around 12 to 24 hours, or at the most 36 hours, and how could we do this at scale? So a lot of work ahead, but a lot of planning that has already gone into a design in the possibility of going forward.
Thanks, Bob. Now, I know at this point you could give a TED talk about testing in public schools with all the research and hours that you've devoted to this, and I thank you for that. I just want to speak conceptually at this point with the board in terms of the idea of testing the entire population. We don't yet have a definitive cost on what that will be, and which we will discuss later. And we also have not discussed the possibility of doing some fundraising for the testing along the lines of a buy one, get one, type of fundraising effort, which we as a board and a district cannot do, but one of our community partners, we would discuss with them the possibility of running it through somebody with the ability to give a tax certificate to individuals who are donating. So conceptually, I just want to briefly poll the board, and of course we would have to come back in public session at a later date to approve a contract amount. And a contract, because it would need to be a separate contract, because the current contract that we approved tonight with Maramis is for the pool testing, for 2 rounds of pool testing. So this would be a separate agreement.
Yes, and I just want to clarify if I can. I don't want to take too much time because I know we have quite a significant presentation on assessment this evening. This is a pool testing protocol, which is the most cost-effective way and with the efficient way of minimizing the impact of testing on individuals. Whereas a PCR test at a doctor's office in the marketplace is somewhere, a lab is somewhere in the vicinity of $100 to $135. We're accomplishing this through this pool testing procedure at a cost of around $15 per test. So we're able to do this at scale in a more efficient way and a consistent way in terms of operating. So it's something to consider. There is no way that if we were going to use a regular PCR test with 5,000 that we could consider the financial cost to this to do it at scale.
Right. Thank you for that, Bob. So just informally polling the board on the notion of the pool testing for the entire population, the ones who've signed the consent forms. And we'd also have to discuss some of the limitations because there are individuals who either have not returned the consent form or have refused to give consent. So,
Rena or Bob, do you want to talk about the cost to do everybody for that one time?
You said about 70.
Hit that was 70.
Yes, I think it's a range of 70,000 on the high end, $70,000 for 5,400 tests.
Thank you.
I wholeheartedly support this, and I appreciate, Bob, that once again we're sort of getting out in front of this as you have every step of the way in terms of keeping our buildings open. And this feels like the best possible shot we have at starting with a clean slate, coming off of a break where people are going to make different choices to open our buildings safely, and then really forge a good opportunity, a real shot at being able to keep our buildings open. So I completely support it. And I also appreciate that you're looking into that piece of not shooting ourselves in the foot with the Department of Health, which hopefully they'll stand behind us in this endeavor, because I think it's excellent.
Thanks, Ariana.
I would support as well. Obviously making decisions with as much information as possible is the best course of action. So I would definitely support.
No, I just say I support it as well.
Thanks, Gladys. Rob, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Perhaps I'm confused on it. So that we're talking about doing the sort of the one-time January, 2 rounds, January 5th. And then how long does that sort of keep us?
No, what we're talking, the contract we approved tonight was for 2 rounds of 20%. Should we end up in a
microcluster designation.
Correct.
Actually, it is for 20% of our in-person student population and entire staff to meet the threshold of 20% testing if we have been designated as an orange or red zone. So that is a set aside that would protect us to remain open based on the regulations. So that's what the board approved this evening. The proposal that I had suggested is for a separate contract that we would move forward on the week of January 5th and test the entire student in-person population, which is about 4,430 students, minus students who've already tested positive, and staff, and then use that as a baseline to exclude those who are positive, so that when students and staff return on Monday the 11th, and so Rob, this would be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because the results go 12 to 24 hours, that we would know as close to that Monday who's eligible to come in. And then I would recommend that we continue with a small percentage of pool testing, which again is they pool test 24 samples at a time for the month of January. And so coming up with a total cost to that, and again, as I said, seeking public financial support through donations to maintain that. The ongoing pool testing is a fraction of the cost. The big cost is this commitment to conduct 5,400 tests.
Which we're not committing to this evening. I just want to get a sense from the board about moving forward, because right now we have nothing to vote on. We just have a concept and what we think will be an estimate of the cost. And I would imagine that the contract is going to very closely mirror the contract that we approved this evening. So I'm not concerned about the contractual terms, but there are logistical matters that we will that Bob will be addressing, and as well as the cost. So more to come, but I just want to get a sense from the board as to conceptually if we're going to proceed with this.
I will express that I am a little concerned about the possibility of false positives impacting, a lot of our families that might have a small business. When we have a positive in the household, everyone needs to quarantine. A false positive might cause a small business to shut down, or a father or a mother that's got the only job to not be able to work. So that is initially, I like that idea. I have seen false positives. So that is just my only concern.
I think one of the things, Christian, I understand that. One of the things, and one of the reasons I really appreciate this Miramis contract is that the PCRs have a lower incidence of false reporting. I know that a lot of districts that are currently within the microcluster zones have received the free tests from the state, and those are the free rapid up-the-nose tests, which are not PCR tests. So Bob, you know more about this than
and to Christian's point, but also Rena, the antigen tests, and in speaking with certainly health professionals, there are a high percentage of false positives, and that's where it becomes actually challenging, because then you're retesting and going deeper to kind of distinguish and determine if it really is a positive case. So as Rena had said, one of the reasons why we researched the saliva-based PCR test is that, again, the reliability and validity around this idea of false positive is minimal or minimized by it, the accuracy of the test.
And my hope would be that we would start to mitigate the massive ripple that happens every time we've had a positive of any kind in these clusters. So that like, where I totally hear you, Christian, I think the other piece of it is the number of families that get impacted every time there has been a case. And that mass ripple is pretty, huge in and of itself. So if we could get out ahead of it and people could come in, healthy, and we could lower the amount of then groups being sent out every day, I feel like that would really help families as well.
And the way I appreciate that, Ariana, and again, I just want to be mindful of the time in the discussion, but the costs of those staff quarantine and the substitutes and that, that is an increasing cost in terms of personnel costs. So by investing proactively in a testing program and then maintaining that to a level that will allow for a safe environment, we're actually, increasing the likelihood that majority of our staff can come into work each day. And again, it's really identifying those who are symptomatic, giving them the quarantine time that they're not exposing to other students. And I can say is that first week pause is really the most challenging moment following the holidays, where people who have socially gathered and or traveled are most vulnerable relative to symptoms and reporting. Sorry, Nora.
No. I apologize for interrupting. I was just going to say, if we think about the patterns that we have in front of us, we saw that escalation after Thanksgiving. It will be even more so after this holiday break. And then we have a February break ahead of us there. And if we don't do something to provide a different kind of surveillance, we won't be able to sustain at the level we are now. It can't just be based on, kind of phone calls that come in at different times of the day and trying to scramble to prevent more risk. So I think we have to have some other way to mitigate the impact of this.
Right. Our approach has really been, this finger in the dike. It really is kind of trying to plug holes relative to what we find out. This is just a different way to kind of a different strategy. And I will say this, in watching all fall how colleges and universities have been able to mitigate the spread, it's precisely by starting with a baseline of safety and then retesting over time. And that's why we're trying to say, how do we take that strategy, using the calendar to our advantage, knowing that, as Nora said, we're going to see certainly an increase in the likelihood of positivity based on decision-making over the holidays. And therefore, we're giving ourselves the best chance starting in the new year. Anyway.
Okay, I'm going to say that, on behalf of the board, it's, we should proceed with this and investigate it, and then we'll come back and have a quorum of the board, if not everybody could make it, to discuss and approve an amount and the contract and all the various pieces of this. And I imagine there's going to be more communication to the community as we proceed. So thank you again. Any other questions? Okay, are there any questions from the community on anything we've discussed so far? No new items, just either our consent agenda or on the testing?
No questions, Rena, at this time.
Okay, I'm going to move along to the report on student assessment data and turn it over to Annie. I just want to start off by saying thank you to Annie and to everyone involved. I know there were a number of individuals involved with gathering information and putting this very robust presentation together. So thank you for all the hard work, and we look forward to seeing the presentation.
Thanks, Rena, and thanks to everyone. Good evening, everyone. Bob, do you want to say anything by way of introduction, or shall I just go ahead and start sharing my screen?
Why don't you go ahead? But as you're making this transition, I do want to say at the beginning, and I know Annie will emphasize the point. This year is like no other year, and we need to fully understand that as much as we're going to talk about the commitment, following through on the commitment we made in the summer in terms of our core values and essential our focus and priorities. Despite that, for all of us, this has been a unique and unprecedented moment in the time and life of a public school. And so I think it's for those who are listening in our community, we need to put this in context relative to the challenge that we face and the work that we've accomplished, and just acknowledge that. And also, Annie, I do want to acknowledge your leadership in the area of teaching and learning, and the work of our school leaders, our administrators, and again, drill down to the individual classroom, the commitment of teachers and support of parents.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you. That's a perfect way to start. I see as I look at the participants list, and I know out there tonight are many of the stakeholders who've contributed to tonight's presentation through their leadership in designing slides and providing data. And I will hope to acknowledge all of them as we move through the presentation tonight. So I think we're going to begin, as we ordinarily do, by just looking at our district mission statement, our North Star. As Bob said, this is a year like no other, and yet the tenets of this mission statement really hold true. So we're going to frame the conversation around this, that it is the mission of the Mamaroneck School District to promote intellectual engagement and an appreciation of learning as an inherently rewarding activity, and to prepare students to function as responsible citizens in a multicultural world. And we could really unpack each and every one of those statements and talk about what that has looked like prior to the pandemic and now how, what iterations it's taking as we navigate through these really uncertain waters. So because this is a assessment presentation, I just thought we could frame it by reminding everyone that when we speak about student assessment and assessment of student learning and progress, we typically talk about 3 different kinds of assessments. So diagnostic assessments, which typically occur prior to learning, where educators attempt to find out what do students already know, what can students already do, and that diagnostic assessments inform the planning process. Formative assessments are those that take place during learning. So how is the student doing? And those types of formative assessments actually, of course, inform the day-to-day teaching and coaching that goes on in the classrooms. And then finally, summative assessments after learning. What did students learn, or what did students across our system learn? And so I wanted to just set the stage to say that ordinarily this report, this assessment report, which is an annual tradition and milestone for the system, typically happens in November. And it typically happens when we have had a chance to review and analyze and aggregate all of the summative assessment data from the previous spring. And we're going to do a little bit of that tonight, but just want to remind the board and the community that, as Bob said, in this year like no other, most of the summative assessments that would have taken place last spring, of course, were suspended due to the pandemic. And so in tonight's presentation, we're going to focus primarily on diagnostic and formative assessments that have taken place this fall and continue to take place, excuse me, now that kids are back in school. So just an example would be, this photo was taken earlier today, actually, at Mamaronick Avenue, where we have Maggie Hodnott, a 2nd grade teacher with a remote pod, convening a guided reading group and using a running record, which you'll hear more about as we move through tonight, to conduct a formative assessment of the students in her pod. So in a typical non-COVID year, as I mentioned a moment ago, if we were reporting in November, we would typically be telling you about either district adopted or state mandated assessments, beginning with the Fountas-Pinnell benchmark assessment, reading assessment. We did not administer the Fountas-Pinnell last spring or this fall per se, due to the complications of COVID, but we will be sharing student independent reading data, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But as I mentioned a moment ago, the New York State assessment program, by that I mean the English language arts and math assessments that would typically happen at grades 3 through 8, did not happen, nor did the New York State Regents exams last spring. We know that the Regents have already been suspended for this January of 2021, and we are awaiting notification of what will happen for spring of 21. But in the meantime, highlighted in orange are the 2020 advanced placement exams, which did occur even in the pandemic. Our students and our teachers really diligently preparing through the unusual circumstances of the spring to master the course content and then prepare for those exams, which did take place. And so the first phase of our presentation tonight is going to be somewhat typical in that we are going to report to you on the very strong performance of our students on those exams. So tonight, what we aim to do, as I just mentioned, is first we're going to report on the advanced placement exams. Then we're going to just take a little bit of a look back, where we're going to talk about what were the efforts at all levels of the system to mitigate slide last the ring. The slide, by that I mean that learning setbacks that might happen due to the interruption of formal education through the spring. What did summer planning look like? What were our areas of focus and emphasis? And then, since school has opened, what diagnostic and formative assessments have we administered? And what have then been the responsive actions, and will continue to be the responsive actions, that we will take individually and collectively in order to really move students forward from where they are? And I'll just point out here, we'll talk more about it later, but here is what a guided reading lesson looks like in COVID times. This is formerly 3rd grade and now 1st grade teacher Jana Masella convening a guided reading group. And you can see maybe in that photograph the plexiglass dividers that we have purchased to equip all elementary classrooms for this type of small group instruction. And the students here are reading one of the literacy footprints texts that, again, you've heard so much about. So this was just on a learning walk at Chatsworth earlier this week, or no, last week, where we just happened upon this. And it's a good example of what that targeted small group instruction looks like that we're going to talk about. So starting, as we often do, we thought we would just put out there at the outset of the presentation some of the big ideas that we're going to mention as we move forward. And as I mentioned a moment ago, with the AP exams, what we continue to see and are very proud of based on the efforts of our faculty and our students is continued growth in advanced placement participation. So the numbers of students that are actually participating in one or more AP courses. And as that participation has grown, we're very proud that strong performance has occurred, typically equaling, if not exceeding, previous performance measures. So you'll hear about that. Bob is going to share those data in a minute. Then we'll go back and we're going to talk about, back to the spring, what were some of the preemptive strategies that we implemented, again, at all levels of the system in anticipation of the setbacks that might occur due to the pandemic, and in order to mitigate any learning loss. But then really the bulk of tonight's slides, we're going to talk about what has happened to safely implement diagnostic and formative assessments this fall. We knew that our priority was to welcome kids back to school safely and to build and establish those warm learning environments, whether those were in hybrid or remote. But then we knew our next priority was going to be diagnostic and formative assessment. So we're going to tell you what assessments were used, and we'll share data and then talk about what are we doing as a result of that. We will for sure note, and I think Bob mentioned earlier, the work of the district equity team. So we are certainly going to note in the data where we see it, the disproportionate impact of the COVID interruption, so to speak, on student learning, particularly with subgroups, students of color and students living in low-income homes. So this remains our great challenge, as you'll see in the numbers that we're going to share. And then we're going to talk about some broad curriculum adjustments that have been made, as well as then at the classroom level, the strategy of using small group and in many cases individualized instruction to target those assessed student needs. But all the while, and it's impossible to really separate out the ongoing focus on students' individual and collective social, emotional health and well-being. We think it would be very appropriate perhaps to make a separate presentation in January or February, depending on the timeline of board meetings. But there's a lot of really productive work happening in this realm. And although it seems artificial to separate it because it can't be separated, we recognize that it would just be too much to attempt to go into tonight. So I'm sort of bookmarking it, so to speak, for further discussion. So Bob, if you want to, I can continue to click the slides, but I think Dr. Schaps was going to talk through a few slides where we are presenting the district's performance, high school students' performance on AP exams from spring of 2020, which did take place even amid the pandemic.
And yes, thank you, Annie. And so as you transition to the next slide, which is really a 5-year summary of participation and performance, that is directly from the College Board. I just want to acknowledge, again, the hard work of our high school faculty and certainly the performance of the students. As we mentioned in the headlines, we see a consistent and steady increase in the number of students who are participating in AP courses. And so you'll notice here a 25% increase in participation from 2016 to 2020, going from 467 students to 593 students who enroll in AP courses. Of those 593 students, they're sitting for a total of 1,517 exams in total. So we see again a steady increase from the number of seats filled from 1210 in 2016 to 1517. What's remarkable here is that over the course of this pattern of increased participation, there's been a 45% increase in the percentage of students, the number of students with scoring 3 or higher, going from 385 to 539 in 2020. And here you see at the bottom row, the percent of total AP students is increased, scoring at 3 or above, to 90%, roughly, or 91% overall. So the trend lines are quite positive in terms of access, interest, and performance. So this is just another, certainly a graphic of this change in the history and percentage of students who were scoring. So we can move on, Annie. As Annie mentioned, which is critically important, in all areas of student performance, we report out and present. If you go to our data dashboard, the participation looking through the lens of our demographics, race, ethnicity, poverty, English language learners. So as we move forward with our district equity team, would be an example of a data dive where we'll look at trends in terms of accessing certain programs and courses. What you see here is that we will break down on a year-to-year basis the percent participation of overall students within demographic categories. Again, we look at this certainly at 1 year, but we try to take a broad view longitudinally of what do the trends tell us. I'm not going to go into that detail other than to say that we will share this and this will be available to the public. There are two, while we will update the data dashboard of the website and provide a complete breakdown of student participation and performance over a 5-year period for every AP course, I wanted to just bring to the attention of the board and the community 2 particular courses in participation. A shout out to MHS Principal Liz Klain and the Social Studies Department, who for many years have been trailblazers in encouraging students to access AP courses by enrolling in junior year in the Advanced Place at U.S. History course. As the board will see here, there's been a significant increase over a 5-year period in the total participation in exams. And at the same time, and this is characteristic, I would say, across the board, from the time when the board made a recommendation or approved removing entrance criteria, we have seen either an increase or a stabilization of mean score. At the same time, we're seeing significant increases in student enrollment. So again, there's a consistency when you look at the junior A-Push course, which is an incredibly challenging college level course for students, followed by what I think is just a wonderful story. So back in 2014-15, we recommended and the board supported introducing the junior year AP English Language and Composition course. The first year, and it's not seen here, we had a total of 50 students participate in the first year of this course offering. And if you look down in terms of the trend of the history of participation for the last 5 years, you've seen now that there's actually been a doubling, more than doubling, going from 100 to 233 students participating in this course. That reflects 56% of the junior class is currently enrolled in a college level English writing and composition course, which is pretty impressive. And at the same time, as we have increased participation, you'll see the mean score has actually gone up significantly. So our whole theory is, how do we, through the change in policy and practice, is provide access to students to rigorous courses, provide support, provide what I would say first-rate quality instruction. And when we do that, what we see actually is a consistency of improved performance over time. And so, again, this is just a wonderful a kind of snapshot of the high school, what it means in terms of equity of opportunity and participation. And finally, we've been certainly reporting on keeping track of what I would say the College Board's AP Scholar Award distinctions. I'm not going to get into it, but on the website, you'll see that for each of the columns and categories, AP Scholar with Honor, with Distinction, National AP, it refers to the total number of courses that a particular student takes in their high school career and their score averages that qualifies them for distinction. And what you see here is from beginning in 2011, we've had a steady increase in the number of students who were named as AP scholars, and across the board, the increasing numbers of students in each category. So, MHS has been for many years defined as a rigorous place of teaching and learning. And as you can see, that I would just say nationally, and the reason we report out on APs, because it really is the one course in the exam that is benchmarked against not only all students in the district, all students in New York State, but students across the globe. So hats off to our students and performance and commitment to take and sit in college level courses. I want to say, and this is one aspect of college coursework offerings at the high school. We have close to, I think, 31 college level courses in combination between AP courses, our honor courses, and dual credit courses that exists with a number of state colleges and institutions. So we're very proud of that. And that number continues to expand. We just learned that for next year, I believe our high school journalism course will be a college credit course with SUNY Albany. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob. I don't know if there are any comments or questions about APs before we move on. Okay. So as I mentioned, we're going to roll back the clock a little bit, just briefly, to last spring, as we were just at the onset of the pandemic, and talk briefly about some of the efforts that the district made that really have borne fruit over time to mitigate what we anticipated might be significant learning setbacks. And it's really interesting. In preparation for tonight, I know a lot of us have looked at leading organizations. How do we compare what the data that we are seeing to what might be out there in populations with much larger sample sizes? And it's very interesting that most of the research that's out there stems from Summerslide prevention studies, as well as studies looking at the impact of other devastating events such as Hurricane Katrina, when students' education was interrupted for a period of months. But there was so much uncertainty back in March when a lot of the work that I'm about to describe happened. So it's interesting now to sort of take a look at it and see what some of the instincts were that really have borne fruit now that we're back in the hybrid and remote environments. So this is just sort of a partial list, and I want to emphasize that in a system as vast as ours, there could have been literally countless examples that we would choose to share. So a lot of what, in conversation with the board at last week's work session, we decided we're going to focus, having reported on high school APs, as Bob just did, we're really going to focus at the elementary and middle school level, primarily in literacy and math. But I would have to say that for every example I'm going to share that comes from one of those content areas, we could be sharing innumerable examples from the other content areas, as well as from the encore subjects, because this effort to really welcome kids back and consider our pre-existing curriculum, but then really prioritize and assess what do these students need is something that I think unites our entire profession at this moment in time. So a look back in spring of 2020, the board has heard a lot about in the community about our efforts led by our tech coaches, Jesse Dancy and Mike Sammartano, along with our IT department and our computer lab TAs, to really prepare and equip each and every child to participate in this new world of tech-enhanced remote and hybrid learning. So I just want to remind everyone that if there is interest in learning, remembering more about what we've done in the area of tech distribution and tech support, we did make a presentation toward the end of the spring, May 19th, to the Board of Ed, summarizing, and we do have some updated data also around that I'm not particularly going to be going into tonight, but if there's interest, that link will take one to it. But also it's interesting that early on, as we were looking to organize our meal distribution for families, knowing how the COVID crisis had caused food insecurity for many, many families in our community, one of our first thoughts was also to anticipate that children and families were going to be spending, a lot of time at home, somewhat confined in whatever that environment was. And so one of the first things we did was order large numbers of board games, jigsaw puzzles, jump rope, sidewalk chalk, art supplies, etc., which we distributed through the spring in conjunction with our food distribution. And it's just interesting now, reading a lot about the impact of the pandemic, on children's growth and development, and the importance of play and the importance of time outdoors. And so I'm proud that that was one of our initial efforts, which was to some extent symbolic, but I think to those families who received these materials, we've also had a lot of feedback, did a lot to preserve just social emotional health and well-being by underscoring the importance of play. In the spring, we knew we sent kids home, we provisioned kids and sent them home with large stacks of books, thanks to our teachers and librarians and our classroom libraries at all levels of the system and our school libraries. We sent kids home with a lot of materials for independent reading. That said, we knew that 4, 5, 6 weeks into the pandemic, it was likely that kids would have exhausted the materials that they brought home. So at the elementary level, in the work of our literacy team, along with our elementary administrators and teachers, was to design and implement a comprehensive independent reading survey. So we actually surveyed all 2,600 children at the elementary level. The K-2 survey, of course, invited parent participation in helping children respond to the questions. But for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, those independent reading surveys were completed by the students themselves. And we asked a variety of open-ended questions as well as closed questions about students' access to reading material, about what they were reading, about what factors were supporting their reading at home, what factors were challenging or inhibiting their reading. And we generated just a massive and incredibly illuminating data set. And because this was done through Google, we were able to really aggregate and analyze that. And so first of all, one of the first things we noticed, as Bob mentioned a minute ago, was that there was a dramatic difference in the rate of return from our low-income families relative to the rest of the district. So perhaps, again, just a sign of that ongoing tech divide that we worked through the spring and over the summer to close. That said, the surveys themselves were really, really illuminating, revealing first that a number of the children in low-income homes were actually reporting to be well provisioned with reading material, perhaps because of 5 or 6 years of the Summerslide prevention initiative with the board and community support, where we have enabled kids to take and keep books at home for summer reading, and that those home libraries were now serving kids in good stead. So there was a tremendous amount of outreach through the spring and a tremendous amount of data analysis from that survey that I'll be mentioning as we move through the presentation. One of the first things that we did was to recognize that even in well-provisioned homes, it was unlikely that for kids that, for emergent readers, it was unlikely that homes contained the kinds of texts that kids were going to be able to read successfully and independently in order to progress as readers. So I'll share some information in a minute about bundles of leveled text that we actually, with the support of Sylvia and our colleagues in the business office, actually sent home through US mail to all of our emergent readers with some pretty dramatic impacts that we've been able to track. Also through the spring, our literacy team and teachers and administrators created a video series for parents that was in both English and Spanish. One branch of the series was about supporting early readers, and the other branch was supporting readers in upper grades. So I think if this link is active, let me just show you quickly, because all of this is archived on the district's website. So if people hadn't had a chance to look at it through the spring, here it is. Yeah, so it's accessible right on mammochschools.org under, I think, the Homeschool Connection, Mammoch Reads video series, and you'll see here the Supporting Early Reader series, Literacy at Home, and all of these videos. Behind each of these links is actually a set of videos which are available in both English and Spanish. So a wonderful resource that if people haven't yet checked out, they might care to do so. So through the spring, there was a lot of what we would call remote book matching. So classroom teachers, reading teachers, and librarians having caseloads of students where they were following up on the independent reading survey, just making sure that kids were well supplied with either hard copy books and or electronic texts. To that point, through the leadership of Kelsey Cohen, our library coordinator, and all of our district librarians, school librarians, we really beefed up through the spring our collection of electronic texts, and I'll have some data to share with you on that, which has just been absolutely a lifesaver. Mike Sammartano, working with our middle school English teachers and Kelsey Cohen and Sarah Malagioglio, launched a Homics Reads app in the spring. I think probably the board and the community is familiar with the electronic reading log that we have had for the last few years at Homics. And so this was the next iteration of knowing that kids were not going to be able to physically visit the Homics library and get their hands, so to speak, on books. So this app, again, which I have a link embedded to here, this is on the website, and I won't play it now, but there's a marvelous video from Mike Sammartano illustrating the functionality of this app, and with an opportunity to launch the app. So if any Homics parents are not familiar with the Homics Reads app, it's definitely something that you would want to check out. And it launched last spring and has just been sensational through the pandemic. Through the spring, our librarians held office hours and just pioneered all different kinds of means of contactless circulation. We're very aware of the quarantine procedures for books at all levels. Every building I'm in, I see different iterations of this system where teachers, librarians, et cetera, are figuring out how to have books circulate safely from our vast collections, but then sit for the appropriate period of time that we know there's no chance that of contamination through the virus. In math through the spring, I think most of the community knows that we had gone with Zern Math to supplement the Engage New York modules. And there we had very promising feedback from both parents, students, and teachers about the impact of Zern. And so that was something that, as I'll mention in a minute, through the summer, we looked to consider how we were going to expand our affiliation with Zern. And at both the elementary and middle school level, there were efforts through Mariana Ivanoff, our elementary math coach, Barbara Dean, our middle school math chair, the math mavens, and members of the math department to really figure out how do we prioritize what of all the math standards, what are the key concepts that are going to be important, and I'll say more about this when we talk about the diagnostic data, to make sure that students have mastered in order to stay on track. And then just a final note for elementary parents, one of the interesting things we did in the spring was to know that the spring achievement reports at the elementary level were not going to look the way they ordinarily would, with teacher ratings in the content areas and an extensive teacher narrative based on just the interruption of learning and the fact that kids were really at home through the spring. And so the elementary administrative team and I worked on a process to solicit parent input, recognizing that there were lots of learning milestones that were happening for kids at home that weren't going to be captured or that wouldn't be evident to classroom teachers. So an extensive parent input process came out of that with some really interesting results of just understanding who were the kids who learned how to ride their bikes in the spring, who were the kids who learned how to fly a kite or who caught a fish. It was, and to figure out how to memorialize these important learning milestones, perhaps not strictly academic, but important nonetheless in the student's cumulative record, so to speak. Just anecdotally, one example that stuck in my mind was a parent who reported that that his child had been asked to set the table every night for dinner in the spring, and that the student got interested in napkin folding and began to watch YouTube videos and began to create each night more and more elaborate napkin folding displays for the table. again, something that would never in a million years, in a typical million years, make its way into the achievement report, but because of this input process did. So just this whole idea of capturing learning beyond some of the traditional milestones. I mentioned a minute ago, and here's just a little bit of data for the board and the community. So I mentioned that we sent home for striving readers, striving emergent readers, we sent home book bundles, and here's some facts and figures on that. So we identified 492 students, and you can see in those sub-bullets, these would have been kindergarten students who were reading at levels pre-A or A in the spring, so a little bit below benchmark, as well as kids in grades 1 through 5 who were also exhibiting some reading gaps. And so we purchased through Pioneer Valley, one of the leading publishers that we work with, both in English and Spanish, bundles of leveled texts that were actually mailed home. So we distributed 492 students, each of whom received 2 bundles, the approximate cost of about $33 per student. And that this initiative was targeted to all students, all striving readers, regardless of income, because as I mentioned before, we know that homes aren't typically don't normally have those types of accessible emergent readers. Also through the spring, we had 243 students who were receiving individualized book matching from librarians and from reading teachers. And you can see in those bullets what the process was for that, where again, we were sending books through the US mail, which was really remarkable with the support and cooperation of our business office, particularly Lauren Leone, the purchasing agent, to help make sure that we were keeping track of every penny. We sent home approximately 3,000 books through the spring through this initiative, with the average cost per child of under $40. And so when we see the reading gains and reading setback, we really have to acknowledge the impact of this initiative. From our district reading specialists, here's what they had to say from a survey in the spring. You can see that 91.7% of the reading specialists felt that those Pioneer Valley book bundles that I just mentioned were really instrumental in supporting the reading teachers' remote literacy instruction through the spring. And here was the reading teacher's assessment of the impact of those book bundles on student reading progress. So if we segue to summer, where we took a lot of the information that we had gleaned through the spring and then set out to figure out, as I think the board certainly remembers, we were planning at that point for 3 different scenarios. 1, the unlikely but hopeful full reopening of school, then also a hybrid and remote model. So one of the key part of our approach there was the affiliation with the Stanford Design Lab, where we had a large committee of district faculty and administrators and community members planning for those scenarios. We also conducted extensive surveys of the faculty at every level and families to learn about their experiences with remote learning. And I'm hyperlinking there, I won't open it now, but just reminding the board and the community that we did report over the summer with a lot of data on what we learned from those surveys. And then over the summer, as we ordinarily would do, we also had our Summerslide prevention initiative, which again involved sending books to children. Ordinarily, in a typical year, kids would have chosen the books themselves from a book fair, but this summer, the books were selected for each grade level and distributed by mail to kids at home. So other components of summer work were, of course, redesigning and equipping our classrooms for the new socially distanced learning environments. But then a major element of work over the summer was thinking about the topic of tonight's presentation, which is assessments. So at the elementary level, we know what our typical assessment plan would include. And so it was important to bring teachers and administrators together over the summer to say, here's what we would ordinarily do, but what is now safe, what is possible to do for both in-person and remote assessments. So Suzanne Carroll, who's our response to intervention coordinator, and I met with a team of teachers and administrators to consider that question. And out of those meetings came a very productive set of recommendations that we really did live by through the fall, recognizing, and I'll list them in a minute, but what the assessments in both literacy and math were that we decided were really worth figuring out. How do we administer them in this new socially distanced world? But also over the summer were a lot of initiatives that the board and community have heard a lot about in order to provide continuity both between school and home for guided reading and primarily for guided reading, but also to some extent for independent reading. We subscribed to the Literacy Footprints digital resources, which are the Pioneer Valley texts, then paired with instructional resources for teachers. We upgraded our subscription to Zern, which was very successful through the spring for elementary math, with a paid subscription that has some vast teacher and administrative dashboard resources, data tracking resources that you'll hear about in a moment. And then with the leadership of Minnie Iannuzzi and Barbara Dean, Minnie is the assistant principal at Homics who oversees math, and Barbara is the math department chair. There had been a lot of research through the spring at Homics about, just as Zern became a go-to tool at the elementary, about what would be very appropriate and efficient math materials that would work both remotely and in person. So there was an adoption over the summer of a suite of tools under the umbrella of Carnegie Math, and I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. We considered at the elementary level what math manipulatives were really necessary to be for kids to have at home in order to learn remotely. And so we sent home a bundle of math manipulatives at each grade level K-5. And then finally, summer was a time when our coaches and our chairs really thought about the professional development that teachers at all levels of the system would need in order to function well in the hybrid or remote learning environments this fall, and created a vast array of professional development modules and tools. So in the reopening plan, I think we thought it was important just to revisit that on July 30th, we presented to the board and the community what the district's reopening plan would be. So this is a slide directly from that presentation. And it's interesting to note that one of our commitments right there highlighted in orange was to use child-centered diagnostic assessments, along with bringing students back to school as much as possible, which is, again, one of the things that we're very proud of. So this was our core commitment, and we really want to impress upon the board and the community tonight that that has been our, our anchor through the fall, was that commitment to really implement safely a range of productive assessments. So here's what that looked like. And again, I'm really just in the interest of brevity, reporting primarily on literacy and math assessments at the elementary and middle school level, but know that this principle was very much embraced across the system, and that we could have included many, many other examples from other content areas. So this fall, in the realm of literacy, it was identified by that summer committee that a running record, and again, I think the board has heard a lot about what that is, but a running record of each child's reading proficiency, this would enable us to determine a child's independent reading level, was conducted for all 2,600 children or 20, I'd say, I guess probably 2,200 children in grades 1 through 5. We wouldn't ordinarily assess kindergartners with that because we don't expect them, of course, to come into school reading. But then a sight word assessment, and then at the middle school level, a diagnostic reading conference with an informal running record. But K-8, we've administered an on-demand writing assessment. This was the work of that summer assessment committee, really recognizing the value of that on-demand writing that we implemented last year. And so it was exciting to see, and I'll show you an example in a moment. We use the same prompt for all students from kindergarten through 8th grade, and have an incredible array of samples to analyze at both the classroom and the district level. And then in math, we used primarily district-developed math assessments at the elementary grades, as well as at HOMICS in 8th grade. But as I mentioned, the new Carnegie Math Program suite of tools was instrumental in diagnostic assessments in math at HOMICS. So what did the data show? This is now district-wide independent reading levels, which we would ordinarily assess using the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system. So in this case, the majority of teachers this fall used literacy footprints tools that you've heard me describe. They might have used Teachers College Running Record or other means. And so what we're showing you here is an apples to apples comparison. We're looking at the children that were here in October of 2020, for whom we also had independent reading levels in October 19, because what we wanted to look at was the increased degree of slide or setback, which we anticipated from COVID. And so what these data are showing is that across the system, so this is the aggregate, that we had in purple here about an 11% increase of students who were reading below benchmark in October 20 from those where those same students had been assessed in October 19. So again, apples to apples, the same children that were here last fall in October 19 who were here now in October of 20, we had an increase overall of 11%, which based on what I'm seeing in the data, as these studies are coming to light, appears to be what we could consider to be significant, but overall relatively mild slide. When we disaggregate, however, and we look at the disproportionate impact of COVID on reading achievement of kids in poverty versus not in poverty, here is where we see a huge disparity. So this is that same measure, October 19 to October 20, both in terms of numbers and percents of students reading above or at benchmark, as opposed to one level below or two or more levels below. And we see that for students not in poverty, there was about an overall 7% rate of slide, whereas for students in poverty, we see 32%. So a really big disparity by family income level. And this is just the headline that, the board and community know we've been reporting on through this crisis is our concern. We also know that students in poverty are disproportionately represented among students learning remotely. So that just poses an additional challenge to us in terms of how to reach these students and really mitigate that learning loss. When we look at along race and ethnicity lines, we see a somewhat less striking, but also very significant divide, where the rate of slide among our white students is about 6%, whereas students of color, primarily Black and Brown, would be our largest subgroups. We see a 20% rate of slide. So whether we're speaking about socioeconomic status or race and ethnicity, we continue to see disproportionate impact in the reading achievement of students among those subgroups. At HOMICS,
so can I just ask you a question about that? Sure. Yep. So these numbers of the reading data, so does that include students who are receiving services?
Yes.
So classified students are included within this data.
Correct. Correct. That's right. And we certainly could disaggregate along those lines as well. For the purpose of this presentation, we just looked at race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status. But yes, this overall rate of 11% slide includes students with disabilities, includes English language learners. This is inclusive of all of our subgroups. This is the whole student population.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So at the middle school, our universal screening at the middle school was a diagnostic reading conference. And I think the board in these slides, I've actually hyperlinked an example of that, a video. So the board has this and can click to view that. But what we were looking for here are a couple of things that you see headlined. Number one, what we would call access streams. So meaning, where is this student finding his or her reading material? And that our access to classroom libraries was somewhat curtailed due to the quarantine requirements that I mentioned. So when we would, when teachers, these were conferences done individually between English teachers and every single student at Homix. And first on the teacher's mind was, what is this student reading and where and how did he or she find it? And that was an important question, just to understand who are our students that are already reliably accessing the public library or the Homix library? Who are students that report being able to bring in books from home of interest versus kids that are really dependent on us to be the suppliers of their reading material? But then also comprehension, we would call that a comprehension conversation. And you can see some of the typical questions that a teacher might ask. But here again, particularly where we might sense or know a striving reader, the teacher would conduct what we would call an informal running record by having the student read a little bit aloud to and with the teacher while the teacher would take the running record and ascertain comprehension. And then also just questions about reading habits and routines. So we know for many of us probably as adults, but certainly for our students, reading routines and habits were really disrupted through the spring. So asking some diagnostic questions about that. And then out of these data, really coming up with a building-wide roster of children that we think were already, fairly robustly on a reading path versus children who needed mild levels of support versus students who needed more significant levels of support. And of course, this information would be triangulated with what we knew about kids from elementary school as well as from prior English language arts state tests. One of the really interesting things, and I've spoken about this at length with Kelsey Cohen and Sarah Malgioglio, who are the Homix literacy ambassador and librarian, were all of the social emotional findings about reading that came out from these conferences. And so it's really notable that some kids are finding reading to be an escape, to be a solace through the pandemic. So some kids' reading lives actually sort of took off during the pandemic, whereas for other kids, they were finding it very challenging to read due to anxiety or a shortened attention span. And so at Homix, this translated into some new acquisitions for the library collection, a lot of shorter electronic magazines, which have been very popular, really taking off among kids, and podcasts. So I know from Kelsey that there's been professional development at Homix for the English department, just in making sure that everyone is familiar with what these resources are in our collection and how to support kids in accessing them. Magazines, it's interesting, just a little fact that the vast majority of the reading that adults do is short nonfiction. And so getting kids sort of hooked on magazines, whether they are, as the case here, news magazines, science magazines, current events, but also typical things that would be appealing to teens and tweens, is probably laying a foundation for a lifetime, what we hope is a lifetime habit of magazine and periodical reading. So just some statistics that the Homix team assembled. So from that Homix Reads app, that we know that Homix students had read about 56, well, not about, by the moment this snapshot happened, 5,627 books, and that through that Reads app, there have been over 2,000 book and help requests. So kids who now, from our focus on independent reading, are becoming sort of knowledgeable and savvy, and through the app, of what they want to read and placing requests that the Homix librarian and clerks are able to support and then hand deliver those books to students via their English teachers. There's been a dramatic increase. I mentioned before the preparation to beef up our collections of electronic texts. So a fairly dramatic increase. This is Sora, synonymous with Overdrive. This is the electronic collection through our membership in the Westchester Library System. And what's interesting is you see here this real uptick around the time of the onset of the pandemic. This is total books opened by our kids, audiobooks and ebooks. And if you look around February of 20 to April of 20, you see this dramatic rise, which really was maintained over the summer and then has increased even more through the fall. So that's total number of books opened. And then this is the total amount of time read, because of course, since they're being read electronically, we're able to capture those data. I mentioned before the on-demand writing prompt, and that we did use a common prompt for kindergarten was optional, but from K to 8, the prompt was the same. If you could do anything for a day, what would you do and why? So we have every student's paper, and these have been really amazing sources of formative assessment data for classroom teachers. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. Here's what that could look like at kindergarten, where an ideal day might involve apple picking. And you see the beautiful illustration here of the apple trees and the ladder, and presumably the child climbing up to pick the apples. And so at the level of the individual teacher and child, the teacher gleans a lot of information about what this child can already do as a writer and what the next steps might be for him or her in class. And of course, as a system, we really get a sense of the status of our student writers across a cohort. I won't show you one from every grade, but it's just fascinating to see what the progression of writing development looks like. So here's a second grade example. I would go camping with my dad, sister, and mom for a day and night. We would go fishing and go swimming in a river, etc. And so just again, some of the notes about what this teacher would be gleaning from that assessment and what the next step instruction would look like. Here's a fourth grade example. And I think that, when I mentioned social emotional a minute ago, I have a clip coming up from Debbie Sampaio, who's our sixth grade Homics English teacher and also Homics department chair. It's impossible when you're looking at student writing to separate out that social emotional piece from some of the technical aspects of writing. So just listen to this voice. This is a fourth grade piece. Since the waves in Larchmont Beach are tiny, I must journey to a new place, Newport. Okay, okay, okay. Let me get you caught up. Ever since I was 5 years old, I've wanted to shred the waves. It's just a dream that's never come true till now. So just again, looking for evidence of student voice among all the other typical writing skills that we would be looking at. So here's just a clip of Debbie Sampaio, as I mentioned, talking about this piece in particular, but also what the findings she and her Homics colleagues have had looking as a department about middle school student writing from this same on-demand prompt.
After conducting the writing baseline assessment, the English department identified the following strengths and areas of focus for our teaching moving forward. For example, some students need to improve their writing stamina, while others need more practice to work on development. Many students will need more opportunities engaging in the writing process, especially in the area of revision. Writing, though, is also a barometer of students' social emotional lives. We as teachers get to know them better in the round through their writing. In this writing baseline assessment, this sixth grade student, who has taken some time to engage in the fully remote model, provides insight into her imagination and demonstrates areas of strength. For example, she showcases the things that are important to her, which I wouldn't have known otherwise had she not been asked to answer this prompt. Her writing reveals her interests: cooking, baking, participating in an obstacle course. It also reveals what is on her mind: family, friends, togetherness, and joy. From a skills perspective, I can quickly see that this writer can organize her writing. There is a cohesive introduction, body, and conclusion that takes the reader from the moment the writer wakes until bedtime. Additionally, the writer uses many vivid supporting details, like when she describes what her friends are wearing when they show up to her house. The phrase, quote, cozy animal onesies, makes her writing easy to imagine. And I can hear this writer's voice from the very first sentence of this piece when she writes, quote, hearing the announcement coronavirus is gone, and, quote, my pet fish rises from the dead. There is humor, fun, and optimism. The writing reveals evidence of all the direct writing instruction that has taken place in class thus far. She's clearly transferred these skills and strategies into her writing. As her English teacher, this assessment has been a powerful tool to not only gauge progress, but more importantly, to have a window into this student's heart and mind. After conducting the writing baseline.
Sorry about that. So thanks. That was again Debbie Sampaio, who's the Homics English chair, speaking on behalf of the department. I always have trouble when these embedded videos, whenever I click, it plays again. So let me just see if I can.
Baseline assessment.
Oh, goodness, hold on. Hold on. So as Deb mentioned, she and her colleagues noticed from department time where they looked at these on-demand writing samples together, they noticed some overall strengths that were common among student papers, as well as then some areas of for further focus, beginning with revision process, and then for many students, as Deb mentioned, stamina, which just makes sense after a long period of interrupted schooling, as well as elaboration, which tends to be a typical issue for middle school writers. In math at the elementary level, Mariana Ivanoff, our math coach, and our math AIS teachers spent a lot of time preparing diagnostic assessments to be administered this fall, knowing that one of the things they needed to do was go back and look at key skills and concepts from the previous year's curriculum that needed to be embedded in these assessments. And so the bullets on this slide here describe that work of designing what were the diagnostic math assignments at the elementary level. And here is the aggregate of what our findings were from those elementary math assessments. You can see highlighted in blue, what was really interesting was that what we saw was consistent areas of strength and need for focus across all 4 elementary schools. And that consistency was interesting because I think it speaks to perhaps the level of curriculum consistency that we have. That a number of topics that either were not covered at all or that were covered perhaps less thoroughly due to the interruption of schooling last spring certainly showed up in student performance on the diagnostic assessment. So you can just see here in blue, these are the skills, these are the percent essentially incorrect in items on the various topics that now we know we need to focus on, both in whole group and small group instruction. So just for example, in first grade, seeing that about half of our students really need support modeling a basic subtraction situation with a drawing. So if I were to say Bob had 10 cookies and Rena took 5, can the kids actually draw a picture that would represent what that subtraction situation would look like? You can just see the other topics there. In 5th grade, this was pretty interesting. If you just look down toward the bottom, solving division problems while with interpreting the remainder. So what that might mean is a problem like each school bus holds 40 students. There are 90 students going on a field trip. If the question were to ask how many buses are needed, the kids might actually perform the division problem correctly and recognize that you would have 2 buses of 40 with 10 kids left over. But that issue of answering the question and saying, so you would need a 3rd bus, it was in that type of problem. And we see this typically, but this was really magnified. That's typically receives heavy emphasis in the spring of 3rd grade of what to do with remainder, of 4th grade. So it wasn't that surprising that we saw this significant need in 5th grade. So a lot of this wasn't surprising, but I think that what was good for us as a system was to be able to see these numbers and then really use this information to plan. And I'll show you more in a minute about what that looked like. At Homix, I mentioned the impact of the new tools as part of the Carnegie Learning Suite. And so you can see here a note from Barbara Dean and Minnie Iannuzzi that each course, Math 6, 7, 8, and Algebra, administered common assessments to gather data on learning gaps from the spring and to determine readiness. And so you can see here what that looked like at 6, 7, and 8. And again, these were some common areas of strength and need for focus that were identified by the Homix Math Department. So strengths in the area of reasoning and problem solving, conceptual understanding, and a need to continue to focus on connections and deeper understanding. And you can just see here some of the more specific areas that the Math Department highlighted need further emphasis. So what have we done? Here's sort of just a very brief summary of some of the responsive actions that have been taking place and will continue to take place. So the first thing is, having invested in all of this diagnostic and formative assessment, obviously there's a huge amount of time being spent by individual teachers, then along with coaches, department chairs, and administrators to review the data, and in some cases aggregate and then use the information to drive instruction. What that primarily is looking like, our primary form of response, I would have to say, is small group and then individualized instruction. And that just makes sense, right? I think we're finding that both in person and remotely, the work that we did prior to Labor Day, led by Mike Sammartano and Jesse Dancy, on helping teachers understand optimal uses of Zoom breakout rooms, that Zoom breakout room has become just a key venue to really provide targeted small group support, both for kids that are learning. Of course, in person, we can physically group them, as you saw Jana Masella doing in that opening slide. But I would say Zoom breakout rooms being used incredibly effectively by teachers across all levels for small group instruction. We have, of course, our reading teachers and our math specialists. What we're trying to do here is to first make sure that those specialists have time to support classroom teachers in meeting the needs of most students in the main classroom environment, right? That we really feel that the level of setback or slide that we're seeing is manageable. There's nothing that seems to be out of whack from what we're gleaning from our surrounding systems or even from national organizations. So we really believe in taking a calm view and a long view at supporting students through a lot of curriculum revision and, as I mentioned, small group instruction. And so a large part of what we're deploying our reading and math specialists to do is to support classroom teachers. That said, we do have, and I'll show you some data in a minute, students that we know require more intensive support, and those students are grouped and have been receiving pull-out instruction through the fall, most of which is happening remotely, and there are a few reasons for that. One is obvious: to minimize contact. We don't want to have AIS teachers going in and out of classrooms all over the building, as we see the way the contract tracing works. So that's just obvious and safety related. But we're also seeing some efficiencies of being able to group kids across schools, which is something that we haven't typically done before for academic intervention services. So where we see like needs, if AIS is being delivered remotely, we can have a group of students meeting with a reading specialist that might be happening with kids from more than one school. And also that's typically happening in the part of the day when the kids are not in school. So at the elementary level, we know, kids are with us for the 2.5 hours, and then they're at home finishing their day and having their special. So most of the AIS is happening in that other part of the day so that they are not pulled out of their time with their classroom teacher. We are communicating progress to parents in a variety of ways. Of course, many informal, just day-to-day by phone, email, or text, but then more formally, conferences at the secondary level, the learning portal in eSchool data, and of course, progress reports and achievement reports. Teachers are in nonstop, ongoing communication and consultation with student support services. I mentioned before, it's almost impossible to separate out a student's academic progress from his social and emotional well-being. And so there's been just tremendous collaboration with student support to look at the ways the impact of interruption of schooling is affecting kids socially, emotionally, and what that looks like in terms of their classroom behaviors. And then just a lot of ongoing tech support. We've had a centralized help desk, which I did report separately to the board on some of the data. We've seen a decline through the fall, a huge amount of support requests to the help desk in September and early October, and now really tapering off. So that gives us reason to think, along with what we hear directly from teachers, that the vast majority of our students are now reliably accessing learning through their devices and Wi-Fi connection at home. And then also, as I mentioned, we are continuing at all levels of the system to really stay in touch with regional and national professional organizations, to compare notes, to understand effective practices, and constantly keep learning as we go, so to speak, to drive our next steps.
And so one quick thing, just going back to the prior slide, the bullet with progress communicated to parents by conference, portal, and achievement report. Seeing as parents are currently in parents and teachers and parent-teacher conferences, what questions would you recommend parents ask about their child's progress, given some of the assessment work that's been going on?
Sure. Yeah, I think that hopefully teachers are really primed to share the results of the assessments that I've mentioned. So just in terms of reading and math progress, understanding where is my child on that trajectory of growth that we would expect to see. Typically, I mean, this is what would happen at a typical conference, but for example, not only would a teacher have the child's on-demand sample, he or she would also have all the writing, produced over time, the results of course, the independent reading level that was assessed, but again, ongoing observations of that child. So I would think that, the usual questions, but teachers we've tried to give teachers the ability to really focus in math and literacy. As the board knows, that's where we've placed a lot of emphasis, as we stated over the summer. So I think teachers are going to be really well equipped to show both artifacts from these assessments that I've mentioned, but then also just day to day, the artifacts of instruction to report on student progress. So just a little bit of data. We've targeted one cycle of reading support at both the elementary and middle school level to be sort of winding down now as we approach the winter vacation. So you can see here from the first cycle, interestingly, reading recovery, which typically is a first grade program, we worked with our regional coordinator, Mary Ellen Cull, and understood that reading recovery would begin this year with students that might have been slated to be in the second cohort last spring as first graders, where that did not happen because of COVID. So we currently have 26 second graders across the system that are participating in reading recovery, which is a one-on-one intervention. It is being delivered remotely now. And then we have beyond that 211 students who are participating in an initial cycle of pull-out support delivered remotely from reading specialists. And right now is the time that we're looking at the progress of those kids, many kids making accelerated gains. So Rena, as you ask, that would be the kind of thing that teachers ought to be able to report to parents in these conferences that are happening. And then we're going to reevaluate which students would really benefit from pull-out support in the next cycle. Just another data point, I keep mentioning literacy footprints, which we're using primarily for guided reading. So we get a lot of, there's a fairly sophisticated dashboard that you can see. So this was just this week at a glance, this was noon today. So we were only, noon on a Tuesday. There had already been 1,061 books read, 242 assignments completed, And since the fall, over 30,000 literacy footprints texts read. What I understand is actually this is probably dramatically underreported, because in order for this to show up, the child has to actually click something, a completion button, which is not necessarily something that happens regularly. And these texts are used primarily for guided reading, not independent reading. So we're excited to be able to track. In other words, the actual amount of reading done is probably far more than what's recorded here, even though these numbers are pretty robust. And then again, just some similar figures from Homics. There's Kim Armagida in the middle there, one of our Homics literacy specialists with her roving book cart, along with Minnie Iannuzzi, assistant principal. We were on a learning walk and just ran into Kim, who was making her rounds in response to conferences that she had been having with some of our Homics readers. So 123 students that, based on those diagnostic conferences, are in a callback rotation, and 33 students that are in a more intense daily literacy class, again, all being evaluated now as we approach the winter break. And just a bit more then about math, about what we're doing about those formative assessments that I mentioned before. Mariana and the team at the elementary level designed a protocol for classroom teachers. It was really very user-friendly. So as each teacher got a class report on her students' work on that assessment, they were prompted to consider what concepts and skills are the majority of my students lacking or needing support in, what concepts and skills are groups of kids in my class lacking, and individual kids, and then supported in planning accordingly. Obviously, anything where a majority of the class needs support, then that has curricular implications, as opposed to subgroups where that would be typically handled through small group instruction, or in this case, guided math. And I mentioned before the math manipulatives that were sent home to all students that were looked a little bit different grade level by grade level, but in order to support students' learnings at home. Here's I wanted to share Neil Oliva, Dr. Oliva, a principal at Mamaronic Avenue, is the elementary administrator charged with providing leadership and support in math. So I'm just going to play a brief clip of Neil talking about how he as an administrator uses the diagnostic features of Zern in order to monitor student progress in math.
Good evening to the board, my fellow colleagues, and the entire community. My name is Neil Oliva, and I am the principal of Mamaroneck Avenue School. And I'm here just to take a few moments to review some of the powerful features of Zern Math, albeit asynchronously. Zern Math is an incredibly powerful platform and tool for teachers, for students, and administrators. Right now, I'm going to focus on just two different types of reports that can be generated that you can see right here. There are more reports that we can generate of Zern Math, and it gives principals the perspective to be able to look at how the school's doing with progress and pacing, with how each grade level is doing, with how each class is doing, and down to the student. And these reports allow principals and assistant principals to have important and targeted conversations with teachers to talk specifically about students and their math progress. Just two reports right here, and I'm not going to go through the motions here because we don't want to reveal any personal information about students, but just to give an example of two reports that can be generated are the progress report and the pace report. The progress report lists every lesson each student has completed, and I can find that by class and by grade, which allows me to hone in on not just classes, but specific students, which allows for conversations to take place between us and teachers on possible differentiated instruction. There's also what's called the PACE report, and this report provides a list of every student with the last sign-in, their current lesson, to what extent they're signing in, how frequently a student is signing in, and again, it allows for important conversations to take place between administrators and teachers on how best to support students. There are more reports that can be generated on Zern by teachers, more reports that can be generated by administrators as well, but this is just to give a little bit of the flavor of what we can do with Zern and just how powerful a tool it is. And a tool, I should add, that we're still learning about and still implementing into our daily practice to not only support teachers, but to support students as well. I know that Miss Ali Siakis and Miss Gina Ahern have a little video for you as well, because they have been quite masterful in their implementation of Zern Math over the last couple months. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Neil. So with that in mind, with Neil's segue, I'll just transfer. Neil asked, as he mentioned, his teacher, Mamaroneck Avenue teacher, Ali Siakis, who I think might even be on the call tonight, and her ICT partner, Gina Ahern, to talk about what Zern looks like at the classroom level and the work that they've done actually to sort of prep students to really participate robustly in Zern. So I'll just play this brief clip as well.
From the beginning of the year, we wanted to prioritize our students becoming more independent with the technology that they would need to use, both during the remote portion of the hybrid day and should we go full remote. We started by giving them virtual scavenger hunts to become comfortable with our class website and with some of the important websites that they would be using throughout the year, such as BrainPop, Capstone, and Pebble Go. We had them learn how to bookmark these important websites. We also had them sign in at school so that they were able to save their passwords and make things a little bit easier at home. We also spent time looking at literacy footprints and Zern, because those would be the primary sources of our literacy and math work at home. We taught the kids how to use both of those websites. We spent time on Zern talking about what made a complete lesson. The hardest thing about Zern is that it will allow children to keep going past the lesson that they're assigned to. So we spent a lot of time talking about what a lesson looks like. We did some as a class, we did some together, and our kids became really comfortable with it. We then began assigning Zern lessons to match what we were teaching in the classroom, and we were pretty specific about what lesson they would be doing each day, and then we are able to check in on that. On the teacher side of Zern, you're able to see what lesson each child is on, and you're able to see how they progress through the lesson and if anything was hard for them. And then we are able to give feedback both virtually and in person to support kids using that information. We have had a lot of success using both literacy footprints and Zern. Our students are interacting with both of those websites almost every single day.
Thanks, Ali. I hope you just get a tiny sense from that example of the phenomenal learning curve that our teachers, that our administrators, and that our students and families have been on. You know, I think what Ali was able to capture there was just it's one thing to adopt a tool like Zern, but to really bring it to life and equip every child and every family to access that tool robustly is just a huge labor of love. So I want to thank Neil for his leadership, and then also thank Ali and Gina for contributing that vivid example. In the interest of time, I received so much information from so many people in preparation for tonight. Similarly, this is a slide from Barbara Dean, Homic's math chair, and Minnie Iannuzzi about what the Homic's math department has done with the diagnostic assessments. And so here you can just see, I'm just going to move my that more time was devoted to multi-step problems with fractions, which again came directly out of the data. And so just an example of what that would actually look like, in practice in terms of a problem within the Carnegie Learning Suite. So again, just some more classroom snapshots from Homic's, 6th grade in-school and remote learning peers discussing math strategies, as I mentioned a minute ago, in Zoom breakout rooms. And so you see the note here from one of the Homics math teachers: students are engaged in rich and complex math tasks daily. Though they're separated by location, they continue to articulate their processes and procedures to each other and share multiple methods for solving challenging problems. So I think you're seeing some themes here, but small groups for math during callback periods at Homics, using data to inform in-classroom support from AIS teachers. I'll show you something about that in a minute, and special educators. Zoom breakout rooms prioritizing differentiation support. And power standards, that idea that there does have to be some compacting of the curriculum just based on the interruptions of last spring. And that's where our leading professional organizations are really helpful. So I know that National Council for Teachers of Math, for example, has really led the way in guiding teachers in how to make those curriculum compacting decisions to ensure that students are in fact going to be mastering the most important concepts that are foundational for each grade level. And just here again, you see the citation of NCTM about procedural fluency. So lessons at Homics, this is a note from Minnie and Barbara: a balance of skill-based work, problem-based work, the use of callback time, and then just all this different suite of electronic tools that you've seen teachers explore and that we've adopted. Mathia is something that I believe is part of the Carnegie Learning Suite, as opposed to Khan Academy, which is outside of that. And just the ability through these tech tools to really give on the spot and timely feedback to kids so that they themselves are aware of the progress that they're making in areas where they need additional support. Math AIS at Homics, as I mentioned, similar to the elementary, we do have 2 math AIS teachers here. You see Judith Keneally pushing in what that looks like in a virtual environment. She's joining a Zoom group there to provide targeted skill instruction. And this is delivered on a 6-day rotating cycle at Homics. Again, to be evaluated after an initial cycle of support to analyze which kids have made progress and which other kids might benefit from joining one of those pull-out groups. So just in closing, I know this was a tremendous amount of ground covered, even though we really did try to prioritize just reporting on literacy and math. But I wanted to close with a quote. I had an email from Christy Almeida, who is a teacher in our Dos Caminos program, our dual language program. She teaches kindergarten, and she's mentioned something in an offhand email to me, but I held on to because I just thought it was so powerful, where she said, "We're all in a battle against the effect this virus is having on our students. Our computers are our resources, but the strongest resource we have is each other. On we march, laptops in hand, and love for our students in our hearts." So I think just closing with that social emotional piece about the bond between teachers and kids, which is something that I just continue to be humbled by and truly awestruck by each day. I was in several buildings just today where I saw firsthand this, the truly superhuman efforts that teachers are making and the resilience of kids and the support of families. It's, we have so much work yet to do, but I think we really feel heartened that we set out over the summer to figure out these assessment protocols, and we've been able to, by and large, do what we set out to do and gather these data. And then teachers are, both individually and collectively, we're using this information to really target our teaching to give kids what they need in order to take those next steps forward. So with that, I'll close for now and just take any comments or questions that you might have. And just want to thank again everyone who contributed to this. A lot of slides and a lot of leadership around the all corners of the district. So thanks to everyone who contributed data and information to inform this.
Thank you, Annie. And it's clear we've come a very long way since the spring. And it doesn't just happen. I know that there was a lot of hard work that took place over the summer. And a lot of hard work as we ramped up to come back to school. So, thank you to our teachers, to our administrators, to our coaches, everyone who's working to know each and every child in our district, because it's very clear that that is our goal. and to align the resources and the support that each and every child needs, whether it be support to achieve grade level or above grade level, or materials for those students who would be considered more accelerated and above their grade reading level. So thank you for all that work and for this very robust presentation.
Thanks, Rena.
Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Hey guys, I don't have any questions, but having served on the board for 6 years and having been seen the original parts of what you guys have worked on and what your goals were and what was started when I started on the board, and just to see where you've gone is just absolutely incredible, and it's a testament to Bob's leadership, to Annie's leadership, to the entire group, to Nora. I mean, there's too many things to go around. I'm just so impressed with what you guys have presented here this evening. I just think, it's a kudos. It's a kudos to the leadership, but it's also I think it's a kudos to our community who support you guys and everything that you do, and help be a part of this institution, of this system. And I can't thank everyone enough. It's very heartwarming. And if you had asked me 5 years ago, would we be here in 5 years, 5 or 6 years? I'm not sure I would say we would have. So just thank you, and an amazing job. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I have to say that the support of the board, and you've been here, Paul, as you mentioned, for the birth of so many of these ideas, the support of the board that, when we try to study what's out there and then come in and say, here's what we'd like to do, and here are the resources that we need, the support of this board, of the community, of the foundation, as we heard earlier tonight with those student grants. So it really is a group effort and a team effort, and the ingenuity and heart and spirit of teachers, I think, is, I just can't say enough about it, and I hope that shone through the examples that we shared tonight. So thank you, Paul.
It absolutely did. And just one more comment. Sometimes it's important to let the leaders and the teachers of this amazing district, it's important for the board to get out of the way and let you guys do your job. And it's important that you know that. So thank you again.
So I have a comment and observation, comment, question. So first, great work in pulling all this together, and it really is eye-opening. Particularly, focusing on the reading levels for students in poverty. It's a very sobering number. When you look at the delta, at first glance, it's like, oh, okay, that's the delta. But then you look at the raw number, it's like, 111 kids below 1 or 2 levels in 2019, and it's almost doubled to, over 200. And that's a stunning number. And I know we've never been through this, so no one knows, but what's the guess on how many years it's going to take to get everybody back to where they need to be? And I may have missed it, but when's the next time we get feedback or get the next assessment to see, are we starting to pull that number up? Because I imagine it's not going to be, February, we're fine. There's a lot of work, and hopefully we'll see a lot of positive progress. But do you guys have any sense of what it's going to take?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Rob, and for your interest. So, the board knows from the work that we shared at the work session last week that one of the things that I think distinguishes our approach in Mamaronic is a focus, just on what you're saying, Rob, is on rate of progress over time. So not just static reading levels, but what is the trajectory? Is this child making accelerated gains? Is this child making linear gains? Or is this child, unfortunately, sliding relative to expectations? So the data that I shared were from September or October from the initial assessment. So to your point, for children that are striving readers, we then have an expectation and a practice of assessing them again in November. So in that database that you saw last week, we actually have the November rates as well. And now we're approaching January, which is that next time for a formal running record of all 2,600 elementary kids. So we will really know probably by February what kind of progress we've made through the fall, what percentage of those kids that were below benchmark in September have made accelerated gains between September and January. And then how do we really take stock of what's working as we have each year in order to really double down on those approaches. And so one of the things you keep hearing us, and we know it's a broken record, but when we talk about access to books and choice and time, it's because those are the components of reading volume. And that is what we know from research and from our own internal data really makes the difference. And those book matching initiatives, each year on the data dashboard, we've been able to report kids that have made accelerated gains across the year. So we will look forward to doing that again. I think when you look at the research of what's out there nationally, there's a sense that the math, the rate of the consequences of the interruption of instruction in math are greater than the effects of the interruption in reading. And that just makes sense because most kids at home are better equipped in most cases to read than they are, without formal math instruction, for example, that there is that self-teaching benefit of the reading process, which is less evident in math. So we're going to be looking at a course in both realms and would look forward to reporting back to the board on where we stand. Probably by mid-February, we could report again because we'll have the January data that we will have analyzed.
Annie, if I could just add to that, we've been using all the tools that Annie has described tonight because we collaborate very closely, as she said. But what we're seeing is interesting in some of the other diagnostic and progress monitoring tools we're using for kids with disabilities. We're actually seeing some good progress, actually, and kids are getting back on board much more quickly than we thought. And, you could speculate as to what the reasons for that would be, but there isn't although we might not like the way we have to conduct learning at present because of the guidelines we have to follow, there's an intensity of that small group instruction. And when, especially at the elementary level, when they're there for 2.5 hours, it's like jam-packed with instruction. And, it's not 10 minutes to get ready for this class, then travel down the hall, kind of like we are on Zoom. It's efficient and it's intense. And so the kids are really getting a lot of instruction. And we're actually seeing that kids are really accelerating much more than some other years, which is very interesting. That's not to say that there isn't still, catching up to do, but it's way better than we would have anticipated last spring for sure.
I think I'm encouraged when I hear Paul speak from the historical perspective because he's been in it for the long run, right? And hearing him say that is encouraging because I think now we're seeing the data at such a level, at such a zoomed in level, that you really can start to pinpoint the need and kind of narrow in on that to support those most vulnerable students. So I'm encouraged to see where this is going to take us as we move forward to address those needs specifically now, because it could be very elusive, but the system we've established here in this presentation and the way we are looking at data, you can't hide. And I'm encouraged to see where this conversation is going to be in 6 months.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, I also think you're seeing the support and high expectations that were put on for the AP program when the barriers were dropped are a good example of how the district, if they really can focus in and stay on it, can have high achievement for students and bring kids up to the level that they really have in them. And so bringing that down into the reading aspect for elementary school is a tough area to do, but it's clear that you guys keep zeroing in on it. And hopefully this pandemic end, like Nora was saying, some of this small group instruction is allowing us to bridge the gap of what we're losing, and maybe can get back to where we stopped back last year. And you guys can keep doing what you're doing and improving, and we can't let up. And I just, like everybody else, it's amazing what our teachers and administrators are doing right now, and the amount of effort that goes in is not lost on the board and the community. You keep hearing from the community, even when they're frustrated or upset about a school having to close or whatever it is, they all acknowledge the tremendous work the teachers are doing for the students. And
so Sam, I just want to add to that, and thank you. What's interesting about this moment is there's been a transformation out of necessity, that the pandemic and the significant need to kind of enact change and adapt really has played into every teacher's life and every student and parent as well. And so one thing we want to recognize is, what have we learned from this moment, and what is the transformation or transition of skill sets, an expanded repertoire, and heightened sense of knowing children that we want to apply moving forward, that is going to allow us to continue to build momentum around progress for all children. So I also want to say that as teachers have had to kind of adjust, is what do we want to continue to hold on to as a system and build that will strengthen practice and will strengthen our ability to assess and react to the needs of children all the time as part of a continuing cycle.
I would like just to thank Annie and Bob for the great presentation, to see all these numbers and statistics. Whoever is watching tonight, I think that the only thing they can see is a strong district in math and reading and AAP, AP scholars, the fact that they're moving from 31 to 110 students, so that's amazing. I would like to thank you, Bob and Annie, for acknowledge the disparity in the Hispanic community.
Yes.
APs. I think that just acknowledge it is so significant, and I know that is a concern. And I truly believe that the district equity team is a great initiative to start reducing this gap. I also think that this is not just the district responsibility. This is something big, like this takes a village. They take the families, they take organization, they take everybody to be involved. For instance, in the high school PTA in SEPTA, they had the idea to include one Hispanic representative in every single PTA. And I'm working through that. Actually, Glenda Colon already agreed to select one member from the Padres Unidos to be included in the PTA, because the PTAs in SEPTA, they manage the great information that don't go to the Hispanic parents. So it's a lot that we need to put together. And I think that you are in the way. I really thank you, the district, for the awesome job that you are doing. It's amazing. It's more to do, but you are doing great. So thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. I saw that Jackie Emmett had a question in the chat, which I think I can just answer. The question is, when you look at numbers by race, and I assume she's meaning the elementary reading data, is that inclusive of all socioeconomic backgrounds? If it does, it would be interesting to see with those not in poverty if there's a difference based on race. So yes, so we did show the data, and I could pull it back up, but this presentation will be posted. So we did display the elementary reading data first as the entire inclusive student population of all 4 elementary schools. Then we looked at it, students not in poverty compared to students in poverty. And that's where we saw the most significant difference And then we looked at it, white students compared to non-white students. Now, of course, I think as Jackie is anticipating with the question, we have a number of students who, where there's intersectionality. So I might be a white student in poverty, I might be a student of color, not in poverty, etc. So we have, through this database that we have assembled through the work of the literacy team and Jesse Dancy and Claire Reinhardt, we can answer all of those questions in, we can aggregate and disaggregate the data to answer any and all of those research questions. But the thing that we have seen, and the board heard me report on this back in October, is primarily a concern about the impact of poverty on student learning through the pandemic. And then also the correspondence that many of our students who are living in poverty are also learning remotely. And that poses the particular challenge that, again, I know the board is very aware of, and that when we look at our teachers that are teaching those remote pods, they really are on the front lines of trying to ensure that kids are connected, that they are participating, that they have the bandwidth, the Wi-Fi connection, and that those, I didn't even mention tonight, but the amazing systems that have been developed at each school to exchange materials. I was at MAS this morning and just seeing on a day-to-day basis the amount of materials that teachers are, with a lot of clerical support and support from instructional aides, are compiling and putting out in these tubs, and families are making it their habit to get to school and to pick up these materials so that kids have what they need at home. But the challenge of kids in poverty learning remotely is something that is probably one of the number one things that is on our mind across all levels of the system.
So can I, and thank you, Annie, I just want to, again, I know we're transitioning to public conversations and questions. I know that Chris Garoza had mentioned about access to all AP. So we're about to update the data dashboard, and we historically present a summary of each AP course over a 5-year period, including the most recent scores as part of the dashboard. And so we have that. I would say that across the board, I think we're close to 19 or 21 AP exams and courses. I would say our BC calculus numbers, our physics C science numbers are quite impressive. And you see an equal trend of consistent increase in enrollment and increase across the board in median score in some of the most challenging courses that we offer. I want to give a shout out to Lauren Albert. Her economics, microeconomics scores and participation, I would say are probably highest, not only in a region, but nationally and worldwide. And that's an example of how there's been a significant increase in participation and interest in that course. And you can pretty much say that across the board in many different areas of study. And that's really benchmarking, as I said, our students against the world, which is really important.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay, I want to transition now. I apologize. I just lost the board policy 1230 on public. Here we go, on public participation in meetings. I'm just going to briefly, I'm going to open it up to public comment and questions. The board will not permit, I'm just reading excerpts of this in the interest of time. The board will not permit in public session comments involving individual district personnel or students. Persons wishing to discuss matters involving individual district personnel or students should present their comments and/or concerns to the superintendent of schools during regular business hours. All speakers are to conduct themselves in a respectful and civil manner. Obscene language, libelous statements, threats of violence, and statements advocating racial, religious, or other forms of prejudice will not be tolerated. On matters okay, I'm going to end it there. But the one thing I also want to add is that Our board meetings are not the time for extended conversations regarding questions. If it's a question that could be answered simply, we will answer it. If not, we will get back to you and answer at a later time. So thank you again. And Debbie, do we have any questions from the community?
So far, I do not see any questions.
Okay, let's wait for a couple of minutes in case anybody might have stepped away or is looking for the button to raise their hand. I feel like we should have a musical interlude right now.
What would you like to hear, Rena? I can.
Not you singing, but that's okay. Although I don't know, you might have a beautiful voice. Debbie, anybody?
No, no questions.
Okay. If there are no questions, I'm just going to say thank you once again. I just have such profound gratitude as we now head into break and the new year. I know we're getting there, closer to our winter break. Just the profound gratitude we all feel for our administrators, our teachers, social workers, psychologists, nurses, custodians. I mean, this has been such an incredible effort, and it continues. I mean, the work, the donation of the Mamaronic Schools Foundation of those tech kits, which allow teachers to be able to quickly pivot to remote, because we've had many pods of students at all levels and across all schools who've had to pivot to remote learning because of a case in their classes. So just to be able to pick up and switch over to remote, and, you know, to parents, you know, we know this is not easy, not even close to being easy. This is not what anybody signed up for. So thank you to everyone. And I hope that over this holiday season, you have a peaceful holiday season with moments of joy, and just thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's move to, if I could go back and find my board docs. Let's go to upcoming meetings. Tuesday, January 12th at 7 p.m., Board of Education study session. Actually, we switched this. I'm going to skip the topic because we've changed the topics around a little bit. January 26th at 7 p.m., Board of Education business meeting. Tuesday, February 9th, 7 p.m., Board of Education study session. These meetings will all be held remotely. In the event the governor does not extend his executive order, meetings will be held in McLean Auditorium at the high school. I do want to also add that in addition to these meetings, we anticipate that the PTA is going to be hosting a meeting that's going to be called a Budget 101 for individuals to be able to learn about the ins and outs of public school finance. Questions regarding specific budget items and expenditures, those will come up once we enter budget season, which will be in the beginning of March. Okay, with that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, Paul.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good night, everybody. Thanks, LMC, and thank you, Debbie.
Good night, everybody.